Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to our Big Book 12-step workshop on the telephone. Today is Wednesday here in Los Angeles, 9/11/19. This call is being recorded. Please join me in prayer for an open mind and an open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We're right in the middle of step 3. We've taken a deep dive into step 1. What's my history? What's my understanding of addiction? My body is defective. It cannot process my substance or process effectively. My mind is defective. Once I stop intending to stay stopped because of the suffering, I don't stay stopped. My interpretation is, it appears I'm powerless. It appears I do not have an effective power of choice. And that's interesting and very relevant and a problem. Addiction. It's just not the problem. The problem is the unmanageability, the second half of the first step, the spiritual malady. And we looked at it in the area of the third step, actually. The second and third step. We looked at the bedevilments in the second step material in the big book. That wasn't Bill's intention, but it is my direction because it was my experience. And we looked in the step 3 information in the big book in chapter 5 to see the exact nature of where those bedevilments come from, and we looked at pages 60 to 62. It's the answer to the question in step 3 when he asks, well, what do we mean by turn our will and our life over to God? What do we mean by that? It's clear that was his intention, Bill Wilson's, and the big book on page 60 to answer that question specifically. What do we mean by turning our will and our life over to the care of God? And what we saw in step 1, unmanageability, when we looked at pages 60 to 62. Was that selfishness and self-centeredness is in fact the nature of my human nature. My body is defective, my mind is defective, and now we see that the very power of will to make a choice is defective. And in fact, Bill hammers it home at the end of the second paragraph on page 62. We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. That was our experience in step 1. I'm reminding you of that experience now because we're in step 3 and we're reviewing these two questions. What do we mean and what do we do on page 60? we turn our will and our life over to God. He says there, I wish he had put in the word from the step itself, to the care of God. It's a huge omission. I don't understand it. I'm not even going to spend any time on it because I'm going to stay with the wording of the step itself. Turn my will and my life over to the care of God, not to God, to the care of God. Huge difference. When I get in my car, chauffeur driven, I turn over my entire destination, the responsibility for getting me there to the chauffeur. Let's be clear, I don't have a chauffeur, but as a metaphor, when I get in my car to drive it myself, I plug in the address to my GPS and I am guided to my destination. I drive, I'm responsible. It's my car. I know how to do this. I have the responsibility and the training to do this. I have the skills and competency and the driver's license and insurance to do this. I've taken care of all of the support that allows me to take responsibility to drive. I just don't know how to get there. So I rely on the GPS for instructions and guidance. That metaphor just came to me right now. The chauffeur versus the GPS. So I think it works. So on page 60, where Bill confirms step 3, he asks those two questions as he did in step 2. At the beginning of the process in chapter 4, where and how are we going to find this power? And confirms that lack of power is, in fact, the problem, is our dilemma. And we answered those two questions in step 2, deep down inside of us, searching diligently, searching fearlessly, searching honestly, thinking honestly. And so I asked you to take a look at that material again, to review it, pages 60 to 62, just to get the feel of the momentum in chapter 5. But let's take a look at now page 62. Because he answers the question, what do we do? Hear the difference. What do we mean? That's an understanding question. That's a knowledge question. The next question, what do we do? That's an action question. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, page 62, at the very bottom of the page. We had to quit playing God. First of all, this is the action. We are not the center of the universe. I am the center of my life. I am just not the center of life itself. I intuitively know that, but I don't have any real evidence for it in terms of this process. I will get that evidence in step 4. Very clearly. I am not the director. I'm just the actor on the stage. It didn't work. That's why we have to quit playing God. And that's why we're here, in fact, in a 12-step program. Whatever it is that we tried, and we experimented with many technologies, methodologies, suggestions. And they didn't work. And some of us have a real hard time, even with the 12-step program, finding any type of real traction. Next, we decided, hear the word. We're making a choice of our free will. We decided that hereafter in this drama of life, Bill likes the theater analogy, God is going to be our director. Well, what does that mean? Oh, I'm going to be an actor. It's a relationship. Now, he's not that clear here, But he gives us 5 of these relationships. He doesn't say that. He doesn't explain that. But he gives them to us. And then as I look at it and trying to put the puzzle pieces together, I go, oh, he's asking us to make a decision to have a relationship with that concept that we developed in step 2. In step 2, it was just a decision about power. In step 3, it's a decision for a relationship with power. It takes us to the next level. Inside of me, I do not have sufficient power on my own. Inside of me, I do have sufficient power that isn't me, but that is available to me. Step 3, I decide to have a relationship with that power, whatever it is, and you decide. He goes on, God is the principal. We are his agents, another relationship. God is the Father, and we are the children, another relationship. He gives us 3 here. Most ideas are simple, and this concept is the keystone. Here it is again, the architectural analogy, a spiritual arch through which we will walk to a new freedom, which he introduced in step 2 on page 47. That willingness to make a decision in step 2 was the cornerstone. Now he says that step 3 is the keystone. That is that stone at the top of the arch that holds the entire spiritual structure together. That's how significant it is. He merely alludes to it. Some dictionary work or some other kind of work will help you really understand the ramifications of this picture, this metaphor. A new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. This is the promise here. Freedom from addiction, first half of the first step. Freedom from unmanageability, second half of the first step. Happy, joyous, and free is another line someplace in the book. And so on page 63, he gives us the promises. Fabulous. Step 3 promises. Well, we know all about step 9 promises. They're talked about regularly. Quite frankly, I think the promises of step 1 are those bedevilments. If we're managed by our self-will, if we've allowed that deterioration, disintegration, then they promise those manifestations of the bedevilments. The promises of step 2 we pointed out on pages 55, 56, 57, and throughout the text, chapter 4. But here are the promises of step 3. Mystical, powerful, indicative. He's not saying that this happens at this point. He's saying, pay attention. You might have some of this awareness, some of this experience. When we sincerely took this position, well, what do we mean by that? This position, this attitude, this relationship. All sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. There's the 4th relationship. Employer-employee. Being all-powerful, perhaps that's one of the features of the concept of step 2 that you've adopted, you've incorporated. If step 1 experience is lack of power, it makes sense that one of the ingredients to this concept that we all need is power. Being all-powerful, God provides what I need. Notice he doesn't say in the big book here on page 63 that God provides what I want. It's not an insignificant and subtle suggestion. God provides what I need. But there's two conditions. If I keep close to God and perform God's work well. We can speculate about what does he mean by that. My conclusion is if we keep close to God through prayer and meditation, step 11. If in fact we allow God to work through us to help other people perform God's work well, step 12. It's my interpretation, but it sure works. And then I can put it this way. Being all-powerful, God provides what I need if I do step 11 and step 12. Powerful reinforcement of his suggestions in steps 10, 11, and 12, our way of life as a daily reprieve. Established on such a footing, again, this foundation, we became less and less interested in ourselves. Hear the process? Hear the dimmer switch? We become less and less interested in ourselves, mitigating that self-centeredness. More and more, hear the dimmer switch. Hear the process. Hear the promise. We became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, came to believe, as we felt new power flow in, dimmer switch, the light going on incrementally. At some point, we're then aware that there is a sufficient light to see. As we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of God's presence, we began to lose our fear of today, of tomorrow, of the hereafter, of death itself, my interpretation. We are reborn. That's why he calls step 3 a beginning, a new beginning, just a beginning. We are reborn. Very charismatic, mystical terminology here. And then, of course, he gives us a suggested prayer. But he says in the following paragraph that the words are quite optional. One of the suggestions in the assignment 9 is to write out your own third step prayer, not to improve it, but to experience it, to understand it. When you have to put it in your own words, you have to understand the words that are suggested in the big book. He says they're quite optional, as we know, and I've said it many times. The words are not the prayer. The intention is the prayer. The words are not important. But they express our intention, and they're important here because he asks us to pray the prayer with another person. Every one of you has already taken the third step by just showing up on this call because you knew we were talking about it. We won't do the third step together today. We will do that next week. I would like to hear from you today if, in fact, you've had a chance to take a look at this material and also to perhaps write out your own version of the third step, what your experience is, and perhaps if you are so inclined to actually read for us and share with us your prayer. At the end of the prayer on page 63, he says, we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready. We spent lots of time in that consideration, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to God. Can we do that? Abandon ourselves utterly to God? Again, the third step has such high ideals, high model, high vision component, absolutes, so many of them. And that's why I think after the list of the 12 steps on page 60, Bill says, relax. It's about progress, not perfection, even though I'm putting it in the third step instructions in the context of absolutes. very high standards, model language, visionary statements. Relax. We're just human beings doing the best we can, and remember its progress. The last time we looked at utterly was in unmanageability, page 45. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. And now he's saying, abandon ourselves utterly. Well, of course, I can't do that. But I'm willing to be taken to a place of approximation. Hear the difference. That's the set-aside attitude expressed in the set-aside prayer. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person. A wife, a friend, a spiritual advisor. The word sponsor is not in the big book. In 1939, when it was written, that word was not part of the culture. It became part of the culture by the time the 12 and 12 was published, some 14 years later, 1953. The word sponsors peppered throughout the 12 and 12. It's interesting. We'll talk about that when we get to the 12th step. But it is better to meet God alone than one who might misunderstand. The wording, of course, is quite optional. We've covered that. As long as we express the ideal, voicing it without reservation. Oh my gosh, another absolute. Without reservation? Of course, we all have reservations. What does it mean? Do I put on a saffron robe and get a begging bowl and go to Tibet? Well, of course, that's an old idea, perhaps maybe just mine. But we have lots of funny ideas and interpretation of what true spirituality means. And we will learn more about that as we make progress. This was only a beginning. This third step, this prayer expressed publicly in public witness to our commitment. Though if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a very great one, was felt at once. That's the end of the third step, instructions. Next week, I hope you will have reviewed the balance of assignment 9 to the best of your ability, and perhaps at least meditated on the promises and the step 3 prayer. At the very most, perhaps you will have written out your own step 3 prayer. It's a wonderful exercise. I really recommend it. And next week, at some point during the call, I will take you through and lead you through a prayer of public commitment. Praying the prayer from the big book on page 63. So let's bring it to conclusion with the Serenity Prayer. Hear it, though, as I just described it. It's a prayer that acknowledges reality as it is. And it is what it is 100% of the time. And I cannot change reality. I can only recognize it. And then make decisions and take the actions that are within my purview. That's a lifelong learning. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody.